in the Gates, spoilers reveal that, ever since Jacob began working undercover, Naomi had been living with a fear that never truly left her. It did not always come in dramatic waves. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the stillness of a room, in the stretch of time between one message and the next, in the uneasy silence that followed whenever Jacob seemed present in body but somewhere far away in spirit. Other times it hit her all at once. A crushing certainty that the danger surrounding him was no longer distant or theoretical. It had already entered their home, their thoughts, their sleep, and the fragile space between them. What frightened Naomi most was not only the possibility that Jacob could get hurt, it was the growing sense that the tragedy she had imagined so many times was slowly becoming more real with every day he remained inside that secret world. At first, she tried to tell herself that fear was simply the price of loving a man with a dangerous job. She tried to stay calm, to believe that Jacob knew what he was doing, to trust that his discipline and instincts would protect him. But the deeper he became involved in the operation tied to the plasma ring, the harder that became. This was no longer ordinary risk. It felt darker, larger, more poisonous. Naomi did not need every detail to understand that Jacob had stepped into something powerful and deeply corrupt, something that would not allow mistakes and would not forgive weakness. The less she knew, the more her mind filled the silence with images she could not control. Every unanswered call, every distracted glance, every unexplained delay became another reason for her fear to grow. What made the situation even more painful was that Naomi could not simply turn her fear into anger and protect herself that way. Jacob had not chosen this path out of recklessness or selfish ambition. He had gone deeper because he believed he had to. He could not stand close to something as dangerous as the plasma ring and pretend it was someone else's problem. That moral certainty was part of what Naomi had always admired in him. It was one of the reasons she loved him. But now, it had become the very thing that made her feel helpless. The same conscience that made Jacob honorable was also making him impossible to pull back from the edge. As the pressure of the mission increased, Naomi began to notice changes in him that frightened her almost as much as the danger itself. He was more guarded, more tired, more absent, even when he was sitting right beside her. His mind always seemed to be working somewhere else, measuring risks she could not see, carrying information he could not share. Their life together started to feel interrupted, as though the real version of their marriage had been pushed aside and replaced by something more fragile and uncertain. The man she loved was still there, but he was harder to reach. Every day, the undercover mission seemed to take another piece of him and hide it behind silence. That silence became one of the deepest wounds in their relationship. Jacob believed he was protecting Naomi by keeping details from her. He told himself that if he absorbed the worst parts alone, she would not have to carry the full weight of what he was facing. But secrecy did not protect her. It isolated her. It left her alone with fragments, and fragments were often crueler than truth. The more Jacob withheld, the more Naomi sensed that the danger must be even worse than she feared. His restraint, however well meant, only gave her imagination more room to turn against her. She began living in a state of constant anticipation. She listened for bad news even in ordinary moments. A car slowing outside, an unexpected silence, a late return home, any small shift in routine could send her thoughts racing toward disaster. Her body no longer seemed to understand how to rest. Even on quiet nights, even when Jacob was near, she could not fully relax. Peace itself started to feel suspicious, as though calm were only the space before something terrible happened. That was how deeply fear had entered her life. It was no longer a reaction. It had become a condition. The worst part was that Naomi's nightmare was taking on sharper and sharper form. At the beginning, it had been a vague terror, the kind of dread people try to push away because giving it shape feels too dangerous, but over time it became more specific. She could imagine the call that would change everything. She could imagine the silence afterward, the instant when fear would stop being fear and become fact. She hated herself for thinking this way, yet she could not stop. Waiting for tragedy long enough had trained her mind to rehearse it. This strain did not only damage her peace of mind, it changed the way she moved through the world. Naomi still functioned, still carried herself with control, still tried to appear steady, but inside she was unraveling. She no longer felt like someone building a future. She felt like someone bracing for impact. Hope became exhausting because hope made her vulnerable. If she let herself believe Jacob would come back safe, come back whole, come back unchanged, then the loss would destroy her even more completely if that belief turned out to be false. So even her longing for safety became guarded. Jacob was suffering too, though in a different way. Beneath his focus, beneath the discipline that kept him moving forward, he was carrying guilt. He saw what the mission was doing to Naomi. He saw the strain in her eyes, the exhaustion she could not fully hide, the way she had become more watchful, more brittle, more haunted. He knew that every day he stayed inside the operation, he was asking her to endure a kind of fear no one should have to live with. Yet he also felt trapped by the logic of his own conscience. The more dangerous the mission became, the more impossible it felt to walk away. If he stopped now, then all the suffering, all the secrecy, all the damage done to their life would seem meaningless. So he kept going, even while knowing the cost was rising. That was the cruelest truth between them. Neither of them lacked love. In fact, love was what made everything hurt so much. Naomi feared losing Jacob because she loved him completely. Jacob hid things because he loved her, and believed silence was a form of protection. But those instincts did not save them. They wounded them in slower, more intimate ways. Naomi's fear made her more desperate for certainty. Jacob's guilt made him even more guarded. The more he withdrew, the more her imagination darkened. The more her fear showed, the more he felt he had to shield her from the truth. They were trapped in a cycle where care kept turning into distance. In Naomi's mind, the plasma ring stopped being just a case Jacob was investigating. It became the name for everything that was poisoning their lives. It was the shadow over every quiet meal, every restless night, every unfinished conversation. It was the reason Jacob's eyes looked older and his silences heavier. It was the reason Naomi could no longer experience ordinary happiness without guilt or dread. Even when nothing visible happened, the presence of that hidden threat seemed to stretch over everything they were trying to preserve. What frightened her almost as much as death was change. Naomi was not only afraid that Jacob would be hurt or killed, she was also afraid that even if he survived, he might come back altered in ways that could not be repaired. She feared that the habits of suspicion and secrecy demanded by undercover work would not disappear once the mission ended. She feared that the tension living inside him would harden into something permanent, leaving them together in name but divided by invisible walls. That possibility haunted her because it felt so plausible. A tragedy did not have to be dramatic to destroy a marriage. Sometimes it was enough for fear to settle into a person's soul and stay there. There were moments when Naomi wanted to beg Jacob to stop, to make him see the human cost of what he was doing. She wanted to ask how much one mission was allowed to take before the price became too high. But even in her frustration, she understood what drove him. He believed that what he was uncovering mattered, that the danger surrounding the plasma ring would not vanish if he simply turned away. Naomi could not easily dismiss that belief, because part of her knew he was right. That only deepened her torment. She was not fighting a foolish obsession. She was fighting the same sense of responsibility that had once made her feel safe with him. Jacob felt torn in ways he could barely express. The mission demanded total concentration, but his heart remained tied to Naomi's suffering. Even when he tried to focus only on the operation, he could not fully separate himself from what was happening at home. Her fear followed him into everything. He was living as two divided men at once, one bound to duty and one bound to love, and neither half could fully breathe. He could not give Naomi the safety she needed, and he could not give up the mission without feeling he had betrayed his own principles. That split was wearing him down as surely as the danger itself. Meanwhile, Naomi was changing under the weight of waiting. Fear had stripped away her old ideas about strength. She had once believed resilience meant calm, dignity, and composure. Now she understood something harsher. Real fear does not always make people noble. Sometimes it makes them obsessive, suspicious, emotionally raw, and ashamed of how little control they have over their own thoughts. Naomi did not always like the person she was becoming, but she could not deny the truth. Loving Jacob under these circumstances had turned her into someone who measured peace by how easily it might be broken. The loneliness of that transformation cut deeply. Even when Jacob was near, Naomi often felt alone with her terror. She could not fully share it without feeling as though she were surrendering to it, yet keeping it inside only made it heavier. She lived in a painful middle ground, trying not to collapse under fears that felt more real every day. There is a special kind of exhaustion in loving someone whose life has become partly inaccessible, someone you understand and resent at the same time. Naomi lived inside that contradiction. She respected Jacob's purpose, yet hated what it was doing to them. She wanted to support him, yet wanted to drag him out of danger before it destroyed them both. As the risks surrounding the plasma ring increased, Naomi began to feel that the real shock was not waiting somewhere in the future. It was already happening. The damage had already begun. Maybe Jacob had not been exposed. Maybe the tragedy she feared had not yet arrived in its final form. But even before that, fear had already stolen so much from them. It had stolen sleep, ease, trust, and the simple confidence that love could be enough to make life feel stable. Naomi realized with growing sorrow that she was no longer only afraid of losing Jacob. She was grieving the life they had before this mission ever began. Jacob sensed that grief and carried it with him like another wound. He had entered the operation thinking he could protect Naomi by managing the risk and keeping the darkness compartmentalized. Now, he could see that the mission itself had become a source of slow emotional harm no matter how careful he tried to be. This realization did not make him stop believing in what he was doing, but it changed the emotional texture of that belief. Duty no longer felt clean. It felt heavy, compromised, and soaked in personal cost. That is what makes this story so painful. There is no simple villain in the marriage itself. Naomi is not wrong for being afraid. Jacob is not wrong for feeling he cannot walk away. Both are acting from love, conscience, and fear, and yet all three forces are tearing them apart. The deeper Jacob goes into the undercover world, the more Naomi's nightmare begins to feel less like imagination and more like a shadow moving steadily closer. The mission surrounding the plasma ring does not only threaten Jacob's safety, it threatens the fragile emotional ground beneath both of them. What stays with me most is the sadness of watching two people love each other sincerely, while being forced into a situation that keeps turning that love into pain. Naomi's fear feels painfully human because it is not dramatic in a glamorous way. It is repetitive, private, humiliating, and relentless. Jacob's burden is equally human. He is not a fearless hero untouched by consequence. He is a man trying to do what he believes is right while watching the woman he loves pay the emotional price beside him. That is why this storyline lingers so deeply. It is not only about danger, it is about what happens when love is asked to endure more uncertainty, secrecy, and dread than it was ever meant to carry. And honestly, that quiet heartbreak is what makes the whole story feel so haunting to me.